Are you suffering from staff turnover? Too many lost business opportunities? Is your reputation at risk? If so, you know your workplace culture needs improvement, but determining how to do so and where to start is about as fun and effective as trying to assemble a puzzle with no picture to guide you. Culture Change in a Box is a show that takes you on a compelling deep dive into an effective real-time culture change process so you can begin to feel hopeful and re-energized about your business. And now, here are your hosts for Culture Change in a Box, Chris McClellan and Judy Ryan.
Well, greetings, everyone. It's Chris McClellan, the Bowtie Guy, for another episode of Culture Change in a Box. And I'm here with
Judy Ryan
from
Lifework Systems.
It's great to be back, Judy, for another episode of our show. Goodness. Today's topic is creating a healthy workplace culture. Goodness, that's a real broad topic.
Yes.
But I'm pretty sure you can break this down for us.
Yes, that's what I like doing best, because culture change, you could have 10 people in the room and they'd all have a different idea of what it is.
Sure.
And so I liken it to if you have a bunch of puzzle pieces and you don't have a box, so you don't even know how to put it together.
Oh, what a great analogy.
And it's important to feel that there's sort of an end-to-end process to this so that you can see where you're starting from and where you're headed to and all of that kind of thing. So we have it broken down into 7 steps. And the 7-step process is very important to us because the first step of that process is to make sure that whoever is at the helm, the CEO or the person that's bringing this in, or maybe it's an owner,
right,
that they and the team that they have to take it forward all understand and support the transformation process. So we go through an education with them on understanding what the process is, what kind of time commitments, what kind of behaviors we're going to be expecting from them, and from their employees, so that they can really own the entire process of transformation.
That's so important, ownership. Not the company ownership, but people buying into
absolutely. And my job is to hold their feet to the fire.
Right.
So when they start to slip, like I had an owner the other day who had created this beautiful purpose statement, because we always lead with purpose. Our model is partially purpose driven, right? And he had defined his purpose, and we were working in a month where we were helping his entire employee team define their purpose and values. So because each person has to have a star to look up to when times get tough, right?
I love this.
Yes.
Star purpose.
Yes.
Goodness, that's so important.
Yes, it is. It's what you want to be able to have as your go-to. So he had created this incredible purpose, and when we got to the point of defining it for everybody, he said, well, gosh, I want to redo the company one because it's just mine, and it shouldn't be just mine. And I said, no. For those of your folks who have watched Moana or any of those Disney shows about being the fearless leader, I said, you are the Moana of your company, right? And you don't get to back down from that, because a leader's ability to be decisive about bringing in the culture change is the decisive factor. And so when a leader wants to start playing small because he's afraid he's taking something away from other people, I say, no, the best thing you can do for your people is to be decisive in your leadership ability and in your leadership decisions, so that they can then model that after you, as opposed to playing small for them. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. But when you say decisive,
yes, decisive means that they understand what they're getting into, and they're saying, okay, we're not turning back. So what most employers say to me when we're working through this first step, of making sure that they support this process, their biggest fear is, well, what if I lose people because of it? And I say to them, if you're creating a responsibility-based workplace, your question should be, what are you going to do if they stay and they don't want to be in a responsible? Because don't you want to get rid of the people? Who does that? Who says, I don't want to be responsible? In fact, there are people that do, but if they get to that point, you want to say, well, let me help you off the bus. I don't want you off the bus. Let me make that perfectly clear. But if you're refusing to choose responsibility, I want to help you off the bus in a graceful, peaceful, supportive way. Now, that's the demon that the leader needs to wrestle with and get to the point that he sees the bigger picture that says, if I'm ever going to have a sustainable, successful business, I have to be willing to put my stake in the ground in an unwavering kind of way.
Very much
right?
so.
And that's scary.
It is scary. And I think, as I'm listening to our conversation, I'm thinking about just coming back to the word decisive. And I would some people relate that word, relate autocratic.
Yes.
But it's different.
It's so different.
Autocratic autocratic has a negative connotation.
Right.
Decisive, I think, is, it's positive. It's
right. Well, it really is as clear as I'm going to the left or I'm going to the right.
Yeah.
And the kind of model we prescribe is a very specific type of model, and it's absolutely the opposite of autocratic. It's shared power, shared governance, collaboration. There's a whole lot I can talk about the model, but really, when a company chooses it, because it's so unconventional and because it's so distributed to everybody, they have to really be able to say, I'm the one that you can count on to not waver. And so that's why that is the most number one step, is helping them to build, because what they're going to need to do is build capacity in people to change.
Oh, goodness.
And if they can't model that, then
they have to be
able to model
Sure.
that we're going to change, and it's going to be uncomfortable at times, and we're going to feel like newbies and all of that kind of stuff. So you really want to make sure you have the support of the top people. And then the next thing that we do is we measure things that we want to continue to measure throughout the entire time that we work with a company. And when we work with a company to really change the entire culture of a company, it's usually a 2 to 3 year process.
Right.
It can't. Some people, maybe it'll stop at 1 year and maybe they run out of budget or whatever. But most of the time, it's 2 to 3 year project process. Right. And so we measure several different kinds of things. We measure things that are tied to an actual return on investment in dollars. So we might have a company find out exactly what their retention rates are and the cost of, like we have a company right now that has nurses and nursing assistants, and we know how expensive it is for them, and they know how expensive it is for them to recruit, hire, orientate, train, all of those pieces, and how to factor in those costs
Sure.
for replacement people in the interim that are more costly, or having to pay overtime for people to take up the slack and all of that. And so we take actual hard data and say, okay, if this is your retention cost and this is your retention percentage, what if we were to turn it into, instead of 35% retention, it's 10%? That of loss,
oh
right?
My goodness.
We can actually say this is the amount of money you're going to save when we get there. So we help them to identify and track performance targets that are very much tied to a financial. Unfortunately, that's what people require because
Right.
they're spending output.
They want
to be able to prove some investment return.
Right.
We also measure some intangibles. So we measure things like engagement levels. What's the perception of everybody's engagement levels? What amount of clarity and understanding do people have around purpose, values, and vision, goals, procedures, and roles?
Right.
Not only do your people understand those, but do they approve of them? Do they accept them? Are they bought into them? Sometimes when we do that, they discover people don't like certain procedures, or they don't like certain goals they have, or they have no concept of what your purpose and values are. So it's a really eye-opening kind of experience. And then we measure what's called the levels of trust. So we have values, behaviors that we expect people to engage in order to build trust. And we measure those as a whole organization, and we often measure subset divisions or departments, because sometimes you might have a department where there's all these problems going on. You need to understand their specific trust dynamics, where they're weak in their trust behaviors, and be able to directly hone in on those and work through those for that particular team or group.
Sure.
So it depends on the size of the organization, but we measure that, and that doesn't have necessarily a direct connection with their financial picture. However, there have been proven connections between a trust gap being very big, which is bad, to narrowing a trust gap and the improvements in retention, productivity, revenues, etc. So in a sense, there is a general rule of thumb that says when you reduce the trust gap, you improve your profitability by X amount.
It's almost, and I don't think this is a blindsided question, but it's almost like learning how to put a dollar sign to positive employee morale.
Totally. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, you're actually proving the profitability of taking time to invest in people.
Right.
Taking time to make sure that they're their best version of themselves. Yeah.
And I think we lose sight of that there is a value.
Yes.
And
we don't benchmark on those things typically. So what most companies do is they'll go in and benchmark on, are you happy with your compensation? Do you like your benefit program? Are you having any challenges? But they're not really benchmarking what are our behaviors and what are those behaviors actually indicating? It's like saying, when you go to the doctor, they're going to check your weight, they're going to check your vital signs, right? But we don't check the right vital signs on these things.
What a great analogy of that.
Yeah. So not only do we track with them trust, all kinds of things around trust, we also track the alignment that I was mentioning, where you understand and approve, but we also measure the perception of engagement. So if you're in a company and you have 20 people, and I ask the question, what percentage of your 20 people are fully engaged? You're going to have people popping in your head. Like, oh yeah, well, Sam is, and Mary Ann is, but that's about it. Okay, so that's whatever 2 out of 20 is 10% or whatever it is, right? So you want to be able to see people put a number to things, and then we ask them the really hard questions, which is what do you consider your employee, your direct supervisor to be? And what do you perceive your owner or whatever the levels are in the company? So that's a really important, sometimes wake-up call, what the engagement level is. So we take those kinds of benchmarking tools along with the performance target, and we track those throughout the engagement. And we actually use the project to achieve the performance targets. So if we go into an organization where there's 200% turnover, which we're working with a company right now that has that, we originally collect all the data on what is that costing them now. And then we say, if we're going to approach retention as your performance target, then we're going to hit it head on. We're going to go to your people and we're going to say, you are going to also say this, that, hey, we're bringing in this new model because we have a retention model which tells us that you all aren't happy when you're working here, and we want to hit that head on, and we need your help, and we're asking you to stay for a year and work with us on that. And that way, everybody's aware of why you're doing it, what you're doing. It's very transparent.
Everybody's on the same page.
They're on the same page. And those that know that there's a problem, that we're maybe ready to step off the bus, will say, well, hey, if they're going to do something about it for real, and those are your fully engaged people.
Well, we don't want people stepping off the bus. We want them jumping in the culture change box.
Exactly. We want them to be excited. Now, when we take retention as a performance target, we're recommending that we don't start measuring that until those first 3 or 4 months clear out the people that are absolutely rebellious about being responsible. We'd actually had employees say, what's so bad about the command and control model? I liked the command and control model, right? Because they're clinging to victim consciousness with a death grip, right? And they don't want to be really held accountable to themselves. It's not even being held accountable by anyone else. They don't want to be accountable to themselves, and they don't want that freedom that comes with responsibility because they're afraid of it. And those people, if they are unchangeable, which we work very hard to change them, and if they are unchangeable, you don't want them in your company.
They need to, for themselves, they need to go somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that we often also benchmark is sometimes our performance target's not around retention. It might be around increasing the number of billable hours. We've had things like that. Sure. And I'll just tell you a quick story about that. We worked in a company where we worked with 15 facilities simultaneously. And all 15 were 15 out of like 250 facilities. So they were this sort of proof of concept project, right? Well, in this company, in order to get more billable hours, they would incentivize people to kind of almost work against each other to get the most, right? And get the prize. And often they felt like Big Brother was watching them because they had little watches on there that would track like their billable hours and always be updating and everything. So what we did, we said, well, let's take that problem and let's all work collectively, where all 15 leaders of these facilities worked to help one another to raise their numbers by a certain percentage. And then within those facilities, they worked collectively to say, hey, if it makes more sense for me to do something over here that's non-billable, will you help make it up over here? And so now they're all working as a team to collectively move the needle on that. It was so amazing. So it has a dollar amount associated with it, but it wasn't retention. So sometimes performance targets could be all over the map. Sometimes it could be we just want to increase our patient or customer satisfaction, or we want to just generally raise our revenues, things like that. So
we're going through your 7 steps.
Yes.
We've been through 2.
We've done 2.
Sure.
The third one is a little bit more complex in that it has some subparts, but this is where you get not just the senior team to be in support of the general idea of the model, it's for them to develop a very specific plan. So most of our companies kind of go along with the plan we set, but sometimes they want modifications or they need modifications. So it might be how many, so part of our plan includes these assessments that I've kind of mentioned, but it also includes an ongoing set of training. Okay. So that ongoing training is typically done as 2 individual modules that everybody watches, including the leaders, and then a group module where somebody, sometimes it's the leaders, but sometimes it's just a regular employee, they go through and they review this group module, and then they facilitate conversation about what was just learned. So every month you have this individual training, and then everybody comes together, they review it, they study the relevance of it to their workplace, and how would they turn that information and those new practices into resources that become operations of the business, right? So in order to create a custom plan, the leaders need to be able to do that. Well, sometimes in order for them to actually decide to get on the bus together and to have a plan that works for them, you have to make sure the senior team believes in people.
Very much so. I
know people who will say to me, I think people are basically bad and you have to control them, right? Well, I don't want to work with those
I don't want to work.
Right? So I want people, in fact, one of our things that we teach is that people are and want to be great. And then if they're not acting great, it's because there's a system that's broken.
There's a system,
right?
Sure.
So I even believe it so much my license plate says you are great, because I want to remind people you're great, right? So people that are on the senior team must believe that. They have to believe that that their people are worthy of their time and trouble, and that they're good and they want to be good. And they have to be willing to build high trust with those people. And they have to discover, how do we do that? We help them with a lot of that. We help them with a custom plan so that they know how they're going to keep monitoring the building of trust, right? Sure. They also need to know and start to build out a values-based culture. So what that means is, if we're going to live to a certain purpose, we have to know all the behaviors that we have to practice in order to cause this purpose to happen. So that's called value-based. So we're going to base everything we do as a company on our values, and that in itself requires a certain kind of plan. So is it okay if I give you an example?
Oh, very much so.
So Zappos is a company that's known for their culture and values,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And so their culture purpose is also a value. It's an effect they're going to cause, and it's a behavior they're going to engage in to get there. So one of them is we're going to deliver a wow experience through service, right? And that's a way of an effect, and it's a way they're going to operate. So when a typical call center, because they have a call center where they sold shoes, typical call centers would hide their phone numbers on every website page, and make it hard for people to go through a whole system of questions and everything to get to a person.
Right.
And they typically in a call center, they incentivize people to get off the phone as quick as possible, right? Well, when you're value-based, it's not about profitability. It's about profitability is part of it, but it's about creating profitability through values and a certain effect that you're creating. So in their call center, because their purpose was to deliver wow through service, they put their number top and bottom as big as could be on every web page. They always had a real person answering the phone, and they would have this thing that they said, now we don't want you to stay on as long as possible, but we want you to stay on until you know that you've created a wow experience, because your best opportunity is one-on-one with them on the phone. And so that's what they would do. So their behavior was directly affected by this idea that we're creating a value-based culture, and it needs to be reflected in the way we do things. So that's part of a plan. Like a senior team has to be willing to put time into, how are we going to change these operations?
It just doesn't happen.
It won't happen otherwise. So they're going to decide by and design by and hire and orientate and all these things according to a value-based culture. So when our companies devise like their core values, we actually design their behavior, I forget, funded, or I don't remember the name of it right now, but it's the kind of interview where it's behaviorally oriented. So we take their core values and we say, okay, one of our core values is blah, blah, blah. Tell me an example of where you've done that in your life. So we're teaching them how to actually hire and orientate, a whole process for orientating people that come in new. So those are all part of the buy-in on how do we do this here at company XYZ,
sure.
right? We also need to make sure that the team that is leading everybody is committed to remembering and constantly over-communicating purpose, values, and vision, because that's the key to a responsibility-based workplace culture. And there's a man that's very well known, Patrick Lencioni, and he wrote an article on the last competitive advantage, and he said, you could have the greatest marketing, you could have the greatest sales, the greatest products and services, but if you don't have the competitive advantage of having a purpose-driven workplace culture, you're kind of going to miss out. And he said good leaders over-communicate purpose, values, and vision. And so that's part of the agreement. Yeah, and it's hard for them at first. They're like, what's the point of this? It's so abstract. It's so like touchy-feely, right? But it's really what drives change.
Sure.
So, and then the last thing is that they have to adopt value-based strategies, which is just another way of saying we believe in a value-based culture, we're speaking on it, but we're also putting our words into actions. So that's step 4 of the process. So then, step 3. So then the next step is kind of similarly complex.
Okay.
It's where the next level down. So if you're in a large company and you're talking about the senior team is making the larger decisions, right? But you're fully distributing a culture change process all the way down. So the next level are your supervisors and managers, right? And they need to know how to build trust and help people become self-responsible. We call it self-directed. So the steps to that...
Self-directed. Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, people mostly are being dominated by something outside of their own empowerment. That's the best way to say it. It could be even an authority figure inside them that's from their childhood, but it's not the real them. Right? So in this step, the way we help the managers to do that is we help them to really understand the connection between it's important for you to build trust. Trust is foundational. And how do you help people to pick up their own responsibility for that? And then we help them to make sure that they have high intelligence, emotional and social intelligence is what I'm talking about, and that they are able to actually build trust with their people, not just talk about it.
Emotional and social intelligence is probably one of the key components for a successful program.
Yes. And, I want to just take the mystery off of those terms. Really what they both mean is the emotional intelligence is 4 parts. Very simple. You manage you're self-aware. Then you manage self-aware. And then once you're aware of yourself, you make the option to manage yourself. So think about people that might know better, but they don't do better. They're self-aware, but they're not managing. Think about people that don't even know they're a bull in the china shop. They're like a loose cannon, ruining everything, right? And they don't even have that self-awareness to realize that they're doing that. And maybe they're like eating poorly or they're managing their time poorly. There's so many ways that we can become like completely blind to what we're up to.
Oh, sure.
And then when we are aware of what we're doing, we still could choose not to do anything about it, right? So that has its own set of benefits or negative consequences, right? Then you can't even do part 2 without part 1. Self-awareness comes first. You can't do part 3 without part 2. You can't be aware of others if you haven't even learned how to be aware of yourself and manage yourself, right? And then you manage the relationships effectively. Like right now with all the politics going on in the world, we're not so great at managing relationships with many people, right? So that's the big mystery of emotional and social intelligence. And social intelligence is more like part 3 and 4, but emotional intelligence encompasses all 4. So social intelligence is simply I'm aware of the relationships that I have with people or that people have with one another. And I'm able to help them, myself and them, manage those effectively. And you can see that takes a fair level of maturity in order to be able to build that. So in order for people to do that, they have to move away from control methods into a model that most managers and leaders are not used to doing, which is now instead of me controlling you and managing you and me thinking I have to motivate you and judge you, I'm now helping to coach you and support you. That feels very different. So now instead of meeting you once a year and telling you what your review.
Right.
I'm now saying, where can I help you with your relationships, your productivity, and your engagement, with an eye on just always guiding them back to the new tools and concepts. So it's not psychoanalysis or anything like that.
Going back to the toolbox.
It's going back to the toolbox and making sure that you're consistently giving the message, you matter to me, I appreciate you, I'm here to support you, I'm here to help you pick up responsibility where you need to pick it up.
Right.
So they need to understand coaching and counseling skills, not from a psychotherapy mode, but on the systems, right?
Sure.
And then they also need to make sure that the staff feel included and that they see their work as meaningful. So we teach them ways to, in the business sense, hold projects to their employees, but also because they're fostering like shared collaboration, right? But we're also helping them to even take terms like leading a group session or leading a meeting, a regular business meeting, because we want them to make sure that there's no staff that are just kind of feeling invisible. That feeling of being included is very, very crucial, that everyone sees their importance on the team. And last but not least, these managers and supervisors have to take ownership of improving their own performance. So they have to be a step ahead. Even if it's a baby step ahead, right? They have to be able to say, well, I am asking you to do this because I'm not asking you to do anything I'm not doing, right?
I learned something early on in my career from a manager. He had said that, I think it was when I was a teenager working the bowling alley, and the manager was taking the trash out. And, I'd asked him, I said, well, I thought, don't you have, there's other people to do this. He says, well, I can't ask somebody to take the trash out if I'm not taking it out myself, and it needs to be taken out.
Yes, or if you have never taken it out, you don't understand it. You don't understand what it requires or how much it matters.
Right.
So they have to continually be mastering. So it's really interesting when we go through the commitment list, because we have a whole list of this is what everybody needs to learn, this is what everybody needs to start changing in their behaviors. When they go through that, they see a column that shows what all the top people have to do. And then they see a column of all the mid-levels, what they have to do.
Right.
And then the employees list is the smallest. And we visually do that so that they can see, wow, they're not asking us to do anything that they're not doing. Like they don't say, you go off and do this and I'm going to go play golf, right? So that's all the complexity just up to step 4. So you can see there's a lot of moving parts. But they're each one of them quite often off the norm, right? Because how many times do you approach things like social intelligence, etc.? So quickly, the last 3 don't have subsets, thank gosh.
But you're doing great.
Well, I just want to make sure we're not getting too far afield here, but there's also a step where you consciously have everybody working together to create implementation strategies. It's this step is called creating a value-based culture and making sure that the staff are all consistently operating by trust. So at some point in the mentoring process, one of the primary conditions is, are you having a problem with anybody? And it could be a customer, it could be a colleague, it could be a boss. We don't even want them to say who it is or what the story is. We just say, do you have anybody that's less than a 10 in your relationships? And if they say, yeah, I've got 2, okay, what number are they on a scale of 1 to 10? They give us that number. We say, okay, now here's the 8 values that build trust. Which ones of these is the other person violating?
Oh, yes.
And which ones are you violating? And then all we do with that is say, now what actions will you take to overcome your own trust-breaking behaviors? And then what tools could you use to help this other person stop doing their trust-breaking behavior? That's how bottom bones it is around making sure that everybody's operating by those values that build trust, right? So they're even speaking from them. And then the 6th step is to just give people opportunities to take all these mastery skills and practice them in teams. That's why we could take, when I was a young mom, I could take my 5-year-old, who out of my 4 kids was the youngest, and that child could take charge of a family meeting, and the next week the next child would, because we took the time to make sure that they knew how to collaborate in a very, very effective, highly producing, problem-solving way, right? Then once the end game of this entire process of culture change, so we want people to see the real end of this, is that now you have a group of highly trustworthy, responsible, fully engaged people that know how to cross-function to redesign all the systems and the processes and the structures for how you're going to continually improve. So it's not a flash in a pan kind of culture change. It's a truly comprehensive and sustainable process. And that's why we want to reassure people, we've already done all that work. You don't have to reinvent that wheel, right? And they need to be reassured that somebody can handhold them through that.
Reassurance plays a big role in culture change.
Reassurance, clarity. Where are we going? What's our objective? How do we get there? What's the steps we take? That's why we feel it's very important that we can lay out this whole process so that they can see it and feel it and kind of get stories around it and get their head around it.
So we have one left?
No, that's all 7. So the steps 3 and 4 were around developing the plan and making sure all the managers and supervisors are doing the things they need to be doing. Those all have those kind of complex sub-steps. But I have all of that information available through lifeworksystems.com. There's a whole narrated video just on this topic with the visuals which help.
So the process of creating a healthy workplace culture, it does take some time and effort.
It does. It's a slow and steady transformation. We don't want to rock anybody's world so bad that they freak out, right?
But it is a worthwhile journey.
Absolutely. And I mean, we have proof that it works. It just requires every step of this process to be mindfully followed.
And that's why we want to invite all of our listeners to join us in creating a world which people love their life.
Yes.
Judy, it's great being with you.
Thank you.
Culture Change in a Box is a part of the Whole Care Network. Check us out online at wholecarenetwork.com and be sure to visit Judy Ryan at lifeworksystems.com. I'm Chris McClellan, Bowtie Guy. I'm creating a life to love by being with awesome people like Judy Ryan. We'll see you soon for another episode of Culture Change in a Box.
Thank you. Goodbye.